Have you ever seen someone who once abandoned you now being treated the same way by someone else? Have you ever heard that the person who shattered your heart is now losing sleep over wounds inflicted by their new relationships? And you ask yourself, is this karma? No. This isn't the universe seeking revenge. It's not some cosmic force keeping score, waiting to strike. It's repetition. The repetition of their own patterns. Wounds left unhealed find new places to reopen. Behaviors left unexamined repeat themselves unconsciously, and the pain they once caused comes back not to punish, but to teach the lesson they once refused to learn. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You are not punished for your anger, you are punished by your anger." In Stoicism, we're not judged by gods, we're harmed by our own ignorance, our lack of awareness, and our failure to govern our inner world. Every time you ignore your conscience, you plant a fracture, and sooner or later, you will live inside that fracture. It's a cycle, and no one can outrun themselves for long. This video isn't here to help you celebrate someone getting what they deserve. It's here to help you understand, if you don't heal, you'll repeat. And if you've already overcome it, you have no need to seek revenge. Stay, because this isn't a journey about punishment, it's a journey about awakening, a different way of living with Stoic app. And if this video speaks to a part of you, consider subscribing to our channel so we can continue growing through these lessons together. 1. They begin to face unseen consequences. There are people who walk right past you as if they'll never have to pay. They say things that wound others, yet feel no regret. They take people's effort, trust, even their dignity, and keep moving forward, chin raised, as if they were the ones betrayed. You used to ask yourself, will they ever face the consequences? But then time passed, and no one came to demand justice. No one said a word, and you began to believe maybe they really would never pay the price. Until things started to derail in ways even they couldn't explain. Richard used to be a mid-level manager at a major tech company. He never had to yell. He controlled everything with soft power, polished words, calculated nods, and rewards for those who stayed silent at the right time. Richard didn't threaten anyone. He simply took advantage, especially of the young, passionate ones who were too inexperienced to see they were being used. A group of talented colleagues had once left without a single complaint. They didn't fight. They simply chose a different way. Richard didn't care. He still believed, without them, the machine keeps running. And it did, until it started shaking. A major presentation was cancelled at the last minute because upper management wanted to reconsider the entire strategy. A veteran employee handed in their resignation after a tense meeting, and Richard didn't know why. A multi-million-dollar collaboration, one he had been chasing for 3 months, was suddenly rejected. At first, Richard thought it was a fluke, but when these flukes kept happening in a strange and uncontrollable sequence, he started to feel something slipping from his hands until he discovered the truth. The partner didn't reject the project. They signed the contract, just not with him. They chose a young startup, but one with a professional team full of familiar faces, the same former colleagues Richard had once exploited. They had walked away quietly and rebuilt their careers, not to get revenge, but to do what they believed was right. And now, when a major opportunity emerged, they were the ones trusted. Richard looked at the deal that had been taken from him, unable to speak. He didn't even feel angry. Instead, he felt something harder to name: emptiness. An emptiness that power could not fill. A terrifying stillness when you start to realize you are no longer trusted, no longer chosen, no longer needed. And worst of all, you don't even understand why. No one accused him. No post called him out. No one said his name. But every look in that meeting, from boss to colleague, seemed to see right through his expensive suit, straight into the truth he could no longer deny. He had lost something power couldn't hold on to, and that's when karma began. No noise, no thunder, just a quiet unraveling exactly when you thought you were safest. Everything still looked normal. Emails kept coming, the calendar stayed full, the title remained. But beneath the surface, trust was rotting. The people who once respected you began to doubt. The ones who once stayed silent began to pull away. And the scariest thing was, you didn't know what you did wrong. You couldn't even remember, because everything had always come too easily. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What is in harmony with nature returns to nature." Karma doesn't come to punish, it comes to restore balance. And sometimes, the greatest loss isn't money or position, it's looking back and realizing no one truly believes in you anymore. If you've ever been hurt by someone like Richard, remember this. You don't need to get revenge. You don't need to wish karma upon them, because sometimes karma isn't disaster. It's the quiet collapse of everything they once thought was untouchable. And when no one is left to lift them up, they'll learn what it feels like to fall without anyone pushing, without anyone pulling, only the weight of what they themselves have sown. But the strangest part isn't what they lose. It's the confusion when even they don't understand why everything has started to turn against them. And that is when karma truly begins. 2. The opportunities that slipped away without explanation. There are karmic returns that don't arrive with a crash, but with a quiet slip. When you think you've got exactly what you wanted, and then it silently slips out of your hands without a clear reason. Sam was once an ambitious figure in the creative media industry. He wasn't a bad person, but he was highly calculated. 3 years ago, during a major internal competition, Sam and a young colleague named Eric co-led a team to develop a campaign for a big-name brand. Eric was the one who came up with the core idea, a quiet yet profound campaign that tapped into the real experiences of consumers. Sam, with his polished presentation skills, restructured the entire pitch just hours before it was delivered. He changed the titles, rewrote the messaging, and then stood up and presented almost the entire idea as if it were his own. Eric stayed silent, and when the results came in and the applause erupted, Sam walked up to the stage alone. He got the promotion. Eric quietly left the company a few months later. 3 years later, Sam became a top candidate for the regional creative director role in the Americas. Strong record, perfect resume. The interviews went smoothly. Everything felt just like before, by the book, just the way he had always climbed. But this time, in the final round, there was no congratulatory email, no rejection either, just silence. Weeks later, an internal announcement came. The position had gone to Eric. No accusations, no one exposed Sam. But in the final interview, Eric was described as humble, trustworthy, and carrying a depth of true creativity. And in a world where trust is the most valuable invisible asset, maybe, karma didn't need a judge. It only needed a quiet life cycle and the memory of those who were once left behind. Sam froze, not out of anger, but because he couldn't understand what had happened. For the first time in his life, he couldn't explain why he had failed, even though he had done everything he once believed was right. And that is how karma works, not through punishment, but through uncertainty, the kind that makes you doubt your own compass. The Stoics once said, "If something doesn't come to you with honor, it won't stay with you through fame." The things you climb toward by hurting others even gently, even cleverly, will eventually make you unwelcome in the very rooms you once walked into like a star. And Sam wasn't the only one. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple and the genius who revolutionized the tech world, also experienced this. In 1985, he was forced out of Apple by its own board, the very company he had built. No dramatic collapse, no scandal, just meetings that turned colder, glances that no longer held trust, and a letter ending their partnership. Jobs would later admit it was his temper, his controlling nature, and his immaturity in managing people that cost him the trust of those who once supported him most. And while he wasn't punished, he was no longer chosen. The opportunity didn't vanish. It simply passed him by, as if it had never stopped for him in the first place. If someone has ever taken what you deserved, if you've ever seen others chosen while you worked harder, hit subscribe. Stoic app is here to remind you, what is truly yours will never need to be taken by force. Sometimes the most painful thing isn't losing an opportunity, it's that no one explains why. And in that silence, a hollow space begins to open, one without trust, without support, and without anyone texting to ask if you're okay. Losing an opportunity, though painful, is just the surface. Because deeper than rejection is the feeling that no one is truly on your side anymore. And that is when karma begins to seep in. 3. They begin to feel lonely and left behind. At first, it was just a few delayed replies. A few meetups cancelled last minute with the excuse of being suddenly busy. A few glances that no longer carried the same respect they once did. No one criticized them. No one said they were wrong. But somehow, in a way they couldn't quite explain, they started to feel it. They were no longer welcome. For Ethan, a man who used to master relationships through calculated generosity and the ability to steer other people's emotions, this was the most unfamiliar feeling. He used to be the first name that came to mind when people needed help, a connection, or a decision made. But what he gave, though it appeared well-intentioned, always came with an invisible string, a price, a quiet form of control. "I'm good to you, so you should listen to me." And for a long time it worked, until now. Now, Ethan no longer received the same responses. No one invited him out for coffee. Group chats happened without him. A once close friend now just scrolled past his posts without saying a word. Ethan began to feel unnecessary. The distance wasn't loud, but it was quiet enough to make a mind start to drift. Ethan tried to hold on. He posted more, shared stories from the good old days, tried to revive the image of who he used to be, but no one cared. No one remembered. He began to wonder, was he ever truly liked, or just temporarily useful to others? But even that question felt unfair because deep down he knew he had been the one using others. He didn't want to call it karma, but the more he searched for answers, the more Ethan realized this wasn't punishment. It was a mirror. People were walking away. in the very way he once walked away from them. No arguments, no hard feelings, just no one stayed. And on a winter night, Ethan reopened an old album where he and his friends were laughing, where messages overflowed with gratitude. Now they were just memories. The people who used to stand beside him didn't even mention his name in conversation anymore. He thought he was the only one who had felt this until he remembered Don Draper from Mad Men. Don was the man who had everything: career, charisma, power in every stare. He was the center, the one who owned the room the moment he stepped in. But then, slowly, people began to leave. Former colleagues, former lovers. The ones who once worshipped him no longer spoke his name. No scandal, no public fall, just alone. A glass of whiskey in a dark office. A distant look into the mirror where he could no longer recognize himself. And in that silence, Don sat down not because he was tired, but because he knew the tools he once used to control others had lost their effect. People were no longer afraid to lose him. A Stoic once said, "The harshest loneliness isn't having no one love you. It's realizing no one needs you to be loved anymore." Ethan sat in the same familiar room, but now it felt foreign in the most unsettling way. Not because people hated him, but because they no longer saw him as part of their lives. Maybe you've been there when those once close to you quietly began to step away, when you didn't understand what you'd done wrong, when you sent a kind message only to receive that typing bubble that never turned into words. If you've ever been hurt by that silence, hit subscribe. Stoic app is not here to tell you you're wrong. It's here to remind you. The quiet withdrawal of others is sometimes a gentle wake-up call from life. Ethan no longer felt angry. He just sat there for a long time, no longer trying to call anyone, no longer trying to prove anything. For the first time in years, he didn't think about making someone return, but started to wonder why they had left in the first place. And as his attention slowly turned inward, something subtle happened. He stopped blaming and began to feel empty, but a kind of emptiness, necessary to make space for something more real. When we lose attention, we often try to reclaim it using the same things that once made us stand out. But the most painful truth is, sometimes you're no one at all if no one else reflects you back to yourself. And that's when people start to lose trust not in others, but in themselves. 4. Doubt and the erosion of self-respect. Silence can hurt. But sometimes it's not the silence itself. It's what you think about that silence that eats you alive. Richard once climbed to the top on what people called confidence, but the truth was just a disguise. A kind of performance where the audience was everyone around him and the director was an anxiety skillfully hidden. In his most successful years, Richard would smile when others failed. Not because he hated them, but because their failure made him feel safer. He had a sharp, cold sense of humor, always knowing how to hit someone's weakness just enough to make them flinch, then walking away like, "I didn't do anything wrong." And one, he didn't control people with power, but with emotional stillness. When others were hurt, Richard laughed. When others were awkward, he would say something too honest to push them away. That confidence once made him stand out, but it didn't come from inner clarity. It came from making others feel unclear about themselves. But now, things were different. It started with meetings where the smiles directed at him no longer felt genuine. Then came the emails, short, polite, transactional, and then the quiet nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by one question that kept returning: does anyone actually respect me anymore? Richard couldn't sleep, not because of work stress, but because his mind kept replaying small memories, times he had hurt others for no reason. A joke about someone's appearance, an eyebrow raise when someone nervously presented, a cold look when a colleague asked for help. Things that once seemed harmless now felt suffocating. He used to feel in control of the room, but now every glance sent his way made him wonder, are they sincere or just tolerating me? And deep inside, something started to fracture, not his pride, but his self-respect. Epictetus once said, "We are not hurt by others, but by our own mistaken response." The pain Richard felt wasn't caused by anyone. No one insulted him, no one condemned him. But the silence, the shift in tone from those who once respected him, turned the mirror he used to decorate his ego into something else, a reflection of the truth. He was no longer trusted, and worst of all, he no longer trusted himself. Before, a rejection didn't bother him, but now, even a polite no ruined his entire day. He would overanalyze every word, every pause in a conversation, every tiny expression, trying to figure out what he did wrong. Not because he wanted to fix it, but because he no longer knew which part of him was real and which part was just a mask. This is the moment many people mistake for regret. But it isn't that clear. It's not a sharp sting, it's a slow drift. Each day, a little more self-trust fades without a sound, and people begin living like shadows of who they used to be. Richard didn't tell anyone, didn't complain, didn't ask for help, but in his eyes there was a fear he had never carried before. The fear that if no one reflected him back anymore, he wouldn't know who he was. If you've ever masked insecurity behind a confident smile, if you've ever built a strong image to hide the feeling of being unloved, here's a gentle reminder from Stoicism. You don't need to perform to be worthy. Your worth doesn't lie in how others see you. It lies in whether you can face yourself when no one's clapping anymore. If you're on that path, hit subscribe. Stoic app is here not to make you stronger than others, but to help you become strong enough not to doubt yourself. And then, on a day that seemed ordinary, life sent Richard a perfect copy of his younger self. Someone else, bold, sharp, and now treating him exactly the way he once treated others. 5. They will meet a mirror of themselves. Jason used to think he understood the rules of love. He was always the one to walk away first, not out of hatred, not even out of frustration. Just that when the feelings began to fade, he believed he had the right to leave, as if loyalty were a gift, not a promise. With Catherine, he walked away just like that. No arguments, no drama, just a quiet afternoon and a nod. We should end this. He didn't realize that sometimes indifference isn't in what you say. It's in the way you walk across someone's heart without ever looking back. Years later, Jason met Elise, and for the first time, he wasn't the one in control. Elise was independent, cool and introspective. She wasn't impressed by his success. She didn't melt at the witty lines he once used to charm others. Jason loved her with the part of his heart that had long been frozen, and for the first time he understood just how vulnerable real love could make you feel. And then Elise left. Quietly. No argument, just a single message. "I don't recognize myself when I'm with you." Jason froze. He wasn't angry. He just felt something unfamiliar, something eerily similar to what Catherine must have swallowed the day he left her. He had loved with everything, but he wasn't chosen to stay. And suddenly, he understood. He understood why Catherine had looked at him that way. He understood what it feels like to be let go with no explanation. This wasn't punishment, it was a mirror. Elise, somehow, was the perfect reflection of who he once was. And life, in its strange rhythm, had turned the tables, forcing him to face himself, this time as the one left behind. And then there are mirrors like that, even in the world of business. Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, once partnered with the Japanese brand Onitsuka Tiger during Nike's early years. Tiger believed in him, manufactured and supplied exclusive shoes for his company. But as Nike grew stronger, Phil quietly built his own production line and pulled out of the partnership without warning. A smart move in terms of strategy, but not something you could call fair. He didn't sabotage a tiger. He just slipped away. Years later, as Nike was at its peak and preparing to close a global distribution deal, that opportunity suddenly vanished. No warning, no explanation. The partner turned and signed with a competitor. Phil bitterly wrote in Shoe Dog, "I never imagined I'd be treated exactly the way I treated Tiger, but life doesn't forget." Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You are not punished for your anger. You are punished by your anger." That line applies not only to anger, but to indifference, betrayal, and ambition without boundaries. In Stoicism, you're not punished by some cosmic force. You're pulled back to the very place where you once ignored someone else. Karma isn't someone coming to make you pay. It's when the roles reverse and you're made to feel what you once dismissed. It's not revenge. It's a lesson if you're brave enough to learn it. Have you ever found yourself becoming the very person you once resented? If the answer is yes, that's not failure. That's the mirror of life opening in front of you. And you have two choices: avoid it or look into it and grow. Jason didn't chase after Elise. He didn't return to Catherine, but he began to revisit each of his past relationships, not to fix them, but to understand. He realized, who you love matters less than how you leave someone, because some wounds aren't born of betrayal, but from the way someone exits your life without ever looking back. If you were once the one who caused hurt and one day feel that same hurt return to you, know that it's a mirror, not a sentence. And if you were once the one who was hurt and now witness the one who hurt you falling into the same pattern, don't rejoice, because gloating only pulls you back into the same level. You were once hurt because no one understood you. So let understanding be the place where the cycle ends. If you've ever met a mirror of yourself in a way that woke you up, leave a comment below. Your story might become a light for someone else. And if you believe that life doesn't seek revenge, it simply reflects in the deepest ways possible, then hit subscribe. Stoic app won't promise to take away your pain, but it will walk beside you to remind you there is another way to live, one that doesn't keep creating cycles that karma has to break. 6. They can no longer run from themselves. There's a kind of karma that doesn't come from others and doesn't come from outside events. No one criticizes, no one exposes, and yet they still feel themselves quietly falling apart, That's when all the noise has faded and they can no longer run from themselves. Leonard was once one of the best defense attorneys in the state. Sophisticated, sharp, and above all never let emotion interfere with reason. To him, justice was a chessboard, and the law was the rulebook. The better you knew the rules, the easier it was to win. Leonard believed that as long as he didn't break the law, no one had the right to judge his ethics. But then came a trial that changed everything. His client was a wealthy, middle-aged man with strong connections, accused of assaulting a woman on a night filled with too much alcohol and too little conscience. Leonard knew the evidence wasn't on his client's side, but he also knew that if he could plant doubt in the jury's mind, if he could make certain details feel unclear, the case would collapse. And he succeeded. With razor-sharp arguments, masterful redirection, and the peak of his legal skill, Leonard turned the courtroom in his client's favor. The man was acquitted. He turned and shook Leonard's hand with a grateful smile. But Leonard couldn't smile back. That night, for the first time in years, he couldn't sleep. Not because he feared being exposed, not because anyone condemned him, but because he couldn't stop hearing the look in the victim's eyes as she quietly walked out of the courtroom. No accusations, no blame. But some things don't need to be said, because the conscience knows what must be done. From that day, Leonard was no longer the same. He still worked, still dressed impeccably, still walked the halls of wood-paneled rooms filled with legal light. But inside him was a silent tremor of someone who knew he had won with logic, but lost entirely in morality. He began to avoid cases like that, avoid familiar faces, and worst of all, he avoided his own reflection. Because every time he looked, he saw a man who wasn't sure who he was anymore. Leonard was never convicted, but as Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is not what others think of you, but when you yourself can no longer look yourself in the eye. No one needs to punish you, because you already have the harshest judge of all yourself once you've awakened." Marcus also said, "A man's worth is no greater than the worth of his ambitions." When ambition is driven by dishonesty, even victory becomes a burden. In Stoicism, karma isn't punishment from the outside. It's the moment you have to live with yourself and no longer feel worthy of yourself. The anxiety, the emptiness, the disorientation. No one condemns you, but your inner voice never stops. And you begin to feel fear not of others, but of the truth within you. Leonard used to think that as long as he wasn't caught or convicted, he could live in peace. But he didn't realize there are verdicts handed down quietly in the heart every time we close our eyes. There are prisons built inside where no one else has access. And on some nights, when everything is still, the voice of the conscience speaks the loudest. He didn't go back to apologize to that woman. He didn't publicly admit guilt, but he changed how he practiced. He began to take on cases that protected the vulnerable. He joined community legal programs. He taught law students about the line between legal and ethical, the line he had once ignored for years. He didn't need anyone to know, but at least, standing at the front of the class, he felt he was beginning to do what was right. If you've ever done something you couldn't forgive yourself for, don't try to forget it. Listen to it, because guilt is not there to torment you. It's a sign that your conscience is still alive, and that you still have the chance not to repeat it. If one day you find the courage to look directly at that past without flinching, then you've crossed the harshest courtroom life will ever put you through. Tell me, have you ever won but didn't feel like the winner? If so, share your story. And if you want to learn how to live in a way that leaves no cuts on your soul, hit subscribe. Stoic app is not here to judge you, but to remind you that peace doesn't come from winning. It comes from living in harmony with who you are. 7. Karma leads them to a new relationship, but still they cannot heal. There are people who, after everything falls apart, choose to run far away, change jobs, move cities, make new friends, fall in love with someone new. They believe that if they're strong enough to start over, the past will vanish. But after a few weeks of peace, the old patterns return. They grow suspicious when the other person comes home late, check messages, punish with silence, and make the one they love feel imprisoned without understanding why. And in the end, they're left. Again, the problem isn't the new person, it's the old wound that was never healed. Think of Will Hunting, the brilliant young man in Good Will Hunting. He grew up in foster homes, was beaten, abandoned, and learned to protect himself with sharp wit and a world-weary attitude. Will was so intelligent he could solve math problems no professor could crack, but he destroyed every relationship because of a deeply rooted belief. Everyone leaves me. Even when he met Skylar, someone who truly loved him, he did what he always did, pushed her away before she had the chance to leave him. Will thought he was in control, but in truth, he was replaying a familiar script where he always ended up hurt first. That's one of the most insidious forms of karma. Not from the outside, but from within. You think you're living something new, but in reality, you're just hitting replay on an old wound. The setting may change, but the role stays the same. Stoicism offers a piercing observation. You cannot run from yourself. Wherever you go, your ego follows. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You must learn to heal from within, instead of hoping the outside world will do it for you." This doesn't mean you have to be perfect before you can love, but it does mean you have to be aware of which part of you is doing the loving, the healed part, or the broken one. Will only began a new journey when he dared to sit down with his therapist, dared to let his heart soften, dared to be understood and to forgive himself. One scene silenced millions. When Sean, the therapist, embraced Will and said, "It's not your fault," over and over, until Will finally broke down. No more pushing people away, no more pretending to be strong. Just a human being finally allowing himself to feel and to heal. Healing is not about finding someone better. It's about no longer carrying a copy of the same old wound and choosing to rewrite the way you live, the way you love, the way you leave, and the way you stay. If you haven't done that yet, you'll always feel betrayed even when the other person has done nothing wrong. Because it's not them you're betraying, it's your own shot at happiness by repeating what once hurt you. If you've seen someone you care about stuck in a cycle of self-sabotage, share this video with them. Sometimes, awakening doesn't come from theory. It comes from seeing yourself in someone else's story. And if you're in a new relationship but still carrying old fears, old patterns, old wounds, pause for a moment, not to end it, but to ask, are you reacting to the person in front of you or to a past inside you that never healed? Stoicism doesn't promise to erase memory, but it teaches you how to face it without letting it dictate your behavior. You don't need a new stage. You don't need a new person. You only need to make peace with the part of yourself you've been running from. Then you won't have to change your life to be happy. You'll simply stop repeating it, so life no longer needs karma to teach you again. Outro. Awakening not to gloat, but to stop the cycle. Don't wait for life to give back to others what they once did to you in order to believe that justice exists. In Stoicism, justice doesn't come through punishment. It comes the moment you choose to stop your hand from striking back, to stop your words from turning cruel, to stop your heart from hardening just because a wound was never given the care it needed. No one can outrun themselves forever. And true awakening isn't when you see someone else fall. It's when you can look at them and quietly say, "I've been there, and I'm not going back." You don't need to witness anyone's suffering in order to heal. You only need one thing: to not let that pain turn you into the version of yourself you once despised. Because if you've truly healed, you won't need to defeat anyone. You'll only need to win over yourself in that quiet moment when hatred whispers and you choose peace instead. If you've ever watched someone relive the same old tragedy, share this video with them. Because sometimes, awakening doesn't start with logic. It begins when you see yourself reflected in someone else's story. And if you believe that life isn't about revenge, but about ending the cycle with you, then like, share, and subscribe to Stoic app. We're not here to teach you how to be strong. We're here to remind you that you're already strong the moment you choose to live with kindness, even when no one else does.